The plywood mill, it's got a big history in Nipigon, and today we're going to talk to Shirley Nelson and Donna Smith. And they are two of the ladies that worked at the plywood mill. And we wanted to get a perspective from the women who worked there, because their perspectives was entirely different to the two men that we interviewed before, about some of the jobs they had there and maybe why those were some of the jobs they had. So there you're on. Shirley, you want to start?
Well, I started work at the plywood mill in 1979 when my kids were a little bit older. I don't exactly remember what the name of the company was at the time because, excuse me, there were so many changes in the names, from Weyerhaeuser, Multi-Ply, Macmillan Bloedel. What else was there, Donna? Do you remember?
Hard ply.
Hard Ply. That was the original, I think.
Yeah.
When my brother worked there. And I just said my brother worked there. Well, he warned me. I told him I was going to put my name in the plywood mill. And he was a pettibone operator, and he said, don't you dare. I'll make sure you don't get a job there. That's the men's place to work. You know, it's although there was women working there at the time, like Mrs. Boholey, Mrs. Kransky, Maria Onaskavich. They all worked there. So I went to see Frank DeChico for an interview, and he said, well, I'll call you if I need you. And I didn't really want to work there after the threats from my brother and that. I was wondering, well, what happens here with the women? So I went home, and that evening I got a phone call from Frank. Can you come to work tomorrow? Well, okay. So off it started, and I started work there, and I thought, well, I'll only work there for maybe 7 years, whatever. But I was there in total for 28 years. I started on the dryer, as most people do, even the guys. From there I went to patcher. And then at the other end of the mill, they had machines which splice veneer together. It was called the jointer and the splicer. And they took pieces of veneer like birch and sometimes poplar, and we made bigger sheets out of them to make the hockey shafts. And from those jobs I went to, I don't know if I mentioned patcher. And then we also had a machine called a core composer.
The what?
Core composer. Hashimoto's.
Yeah.
Yeah, core composer. Something that came from Japan. And this was going to be our savior to use all the scrap. The scrap veneer was cut out, and, you know, it would save us from throwing so many things in the garbage. So it would sew the sheets together and make sheets of veneer.
Tell what the patcher meant.
The patcher, when you have a piece of veneer, 4x4, it had holes in it or defects, and we would try to make the sheet as nice looking as possible. Okay. And there were grades. There was A's and B's. I don't remember what else there was, and then we would have the pieces of veneer when the sheet was too rotten. We would rip it in half. Yeah. That would go to the jointer or to the core composer, and the sheets would be made. So there wasn't that much waste there. Those are the jobs that I worked on, but as the years went on, women, trained on the different men's jobs as well. Oh, I also worked on layup. That's where you make the panels of the sheets.
The sheets of plywood.
Plywood, yes. And then from layup, they would go and get trimmed up and pressed and cut, and you would have your plywood sheets.
Okay.
That was a hard job, but we enjoyed it. It was nothing like what my brother threatened it would be. We had lots of fun. We used to joke around. sure, in this day and age, some of the pranks that were pulled then wouldn't happen because you'd be up for harassment or whatever, you know. But it was fun.
Yeah.
It was like a community. It was people cared for each other. People traded shifts. They had a good complement of students there. If you needed a day off, you could trade with somebody else from a different shift or get the students to work for you.
It was very much like a big family.
Yeah.
And everybody kind of looked out for everybody. And that's what I liked about the mill. Even the guys would come over if they seen me struggling with the patcher,
Yeah.
you know, if it got jammed or whatever, they would run over and, you know, they were like my knight in shining armor, eh, to come
That's
over and
right.
help unjam me and stuff. And it was nice.
Yeah.
It was very nice.
Or when we needed to empty our buckets.
Yeah.
After the patcher box was full, the waste would go in there. They would come over and help us lift.
I remember James Twykola. He was on my crew, and every time my bin would get full, he would go and grab the bin, go and dump it into the chipper, and he'd go down the line for the women and pick up all their scraps, which was super nice.
Yeah. So what else did you work on, Donna?
I pretty much, when I started, I was there for 10 years before it burnt down, and I first started out on the dryer. And so that was a combination of men and women, and I used to enjoy the dryer, actually, because you got to feed the dryer, and then you go down to the other end, and then you'd start grading your veneer and stuff. So it was exciting. It was I liked the job, and then I went to patcher. I pretty much did what Shirley did. We patched out the veneer and.
The patcher was those nice little oval pieces,
Yes,
right?
right.
Yes.
And of course, I remember those because I'd go and scoff a few, and we'd do crafts at school with them.
Oh,
I
there you
thought
go.
they were the best thing out,
Yeah.
and they were very generous at giving us some of them to use for crafts for school. But
Yeah, at one point, I think they even tried a dog bone one.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know whatever happened to that one.
Yeah, I don't know.
and maybe it didn't as cover as well because that oval one really covered
That's right.
the nozzle.
It wasn't as noticeable either on
right.
the sheet.
Yeah. Wow.
And then I ended up on layup as well, and pretty much the last few years at the mill, I was pretty much steady. You know, I'd come in and my foreman would just point, and that would mean go to layup.
Tell us what layup was then.
So
Dawn.
layup was, like Shirley was saying, it's putting your plywood together. So somebody would be standing up, they would feed the core, which would pick up all the glue, and we would catch it, and then we'd have a face and a back, and we would have to, you stayed in shape because you were always twisting and stuff. I think back then my waist was like this, so some days I wish we were back there. But yeah, it was a challenge to keep up, and because when you're
That's
pre-press and stuff, so you were moving. And I remember on an afternoon shift in the summer, it would be so hot in there. And I can remember standing there catching these cores and the sweat just dripping off of you.
Oh, yeah.
And we'd have to stop and say, like, we need an extra break. Like, and they were good. They were good about it. It was like, go get a break, you know, go get a glass of water,
Yeah.
whatever. And
Or
go
they
back
would buy
and-
us popsicles.
Yes, they were
They'd
really,
come
I
around
remember
and buy
that.
us popsicles
Yeah.
and say,
Oh,
have this.
You want to
and
see a bunch of people get excited over popsicles.
yeah.
Especially when it
It
was,
was
on
so
hot.
hot.
Oh,
It
yeah,
was
it
unbearable.
was. But
And then we had to wear our hard hats.
Yes.
And our
all your
safety
PPE,
glasses. Yeah.
PPE was important back then. I mean,
Right.
you know, you didn't want to get hit with anything, and but yeah, I can relate to the fun times that we used to have, the joking. Yeah, you wouldn't get away with that today.
No,
but,
that's right.
But back then, everybody kind of just had fun, but not maliciously or anything like that. It was just clean fun. And
So in layup, is that depending on the thickness of plywood you would have been making that day?
yeah, it's because I think we only had the one. Actually, no, we did have a different.
We did, when we came on shift, we would go onto the the press area, and there was usually a sheet of paper telling us
Yeah.
what we were making.
Yeah.
But sometimes that could change very quickly.
Oh, yeah.
The last shift could have made a certain product, and maybe next we were making the hockey shafts.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that made a big adjustment. Different glue,
Yeah.
we had to use the urea glue for that, and it was very stinky and it was hard on the eyes. But and then we would have to count, because at some point you have to quit.
Yeah, that's right.
When your load is so high, you would have to quit. Sometimes we made mistakes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Where we wouldn't make the sheet as thick as it would be, or we made a too thick sheet.
Yeah. Somebody would come up
Yeah.
and start talking to you, and then you'd be like, "Oh, what number was I on?" And then you'd have to say, "Okay, stop everything,"
And count.
and then I'd count
the veneer
and stuff, and then
faces.
carry on.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd be like, "Don't talk to me while I'm counting."
I often, many years after I was finished, and after working on that job for so long, I would count in my sleep. 1, 2, right
Yeah.
up to 28. That was the
Yeah.
number for like the quarter-inch plywood.
Quarter-inch, yeah. Yeah.
And
So
then
a 1/4 inch plywood had 20 pieces to it? Wow.
You don't realize until you
No.
start.
because it's pressed down so much.
Yeah,
Wow.
because they're pressing, and you were moving, eh? Like you were
Oh, for
moving,
sure.
boy.
And if you were a little bit quicker, you got that break where
Yeah.
you could go and get a drink of water
That's
or
right.
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And then if you weren't paying attention, sometimes you get hit with the core, and that would sure wake you up.
yeah, because after you worked there for a while on layup per se, you could sometimes carry a conversation with each other, and
You get so
Keep-
used to it.
yeah, and
Yeah.
sometimes the core feeder, the one that was throwing us the cars, would keep
Keep
track
track,
of where
yeah.
we were.
Yeah.
But
But
we
most-
didn't do that.
Most of the guys didn't want to go on layup. They didn't want to go on patcher. I think they felt that was a girl's job. They looked at the patcher like it was like a sewing machine. It was
That's
like,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It was like, oh no, that's the girl's job. They'd much rather go to trim saw or sander. It was more of a masculine type job and stuff. Yeah.
But there was women that worked on the sander.
yeah.
Karen Hardy,
Karen,
for
yes,
one.
Karen Hardy. Yeah. Yeah. And she was very good at it.
Yeah. We had the odd lead hand, which was a helper to the foreman that were women. Josephine Logan,
Oh, right.
she was one. And
Gail Zapatelli was a
Gail
foreman.
was too, yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of, was there anyone else? Girl
There was,
there?
but I don't recall her
Okay,
name.
yeah.
So we were fortunate, really, that they took women there, and it wasn't just a man's
Oh,
job.
oh,
Because
sure.
when you hear the word plywood mill, most people would not associate women working there.
That's right.
I
yeah.
was actually very grateful when I was hired. Glenn Stecky at the time was our human resource. He's deceased. He's been deceased now for a
Right.
while, but very nice man. And I remember going down to the plywood mill because I was a single mom at the time, going through a horrible divorce. And I was determined that I was going to work there. So every day I went down and I brought a resume, and I would not stop. And one day Glenn Stecky phoned me up and he says, Donna, he says, I need to bring you in for an interview because you are taking up way too much room on my desk. He says, I cannot believe that you come here every day. And I said, well, Glenn, I need a job. So I ended up having my interview, and I was working at the time at the Nipigon Esso, and I remember getting that phone call, and my boss at the Esso knew because I was just beaming when he told me, when I got the word that I had got the job. And I said, okay, I'm going to give you my 2 weeks notice. And he's like, Donna, it's okay. He says, you don't have to. I'm so happy you got your job. You just go and you do what you got to do. But he understood that I needed a better paying job at that time. And and it was great ever since.
I just remember Ted. He lived on Park Road. He went every day too, and
Yeah.
Tim Messervier was getting sick to death of all the resumes that
Yeah.
Ted was bringing
Yes.
in too.
Yeah.
And so it was persistence then, but it was fortunate that it was there.
Yeah, it
that
was.
it employed so many people. It would be interesting over the years how many people they did employ there. A lot
Yes,
of people. And
all
you said
different.
a lot of students. I remember
Oh,
that.
a lot
Oh,
of students
even
put their
my
way,
son.
you put themselves through college,
Yes.
university.
Yes, for
Yeah.
They
sure.
picked up many shifts.
Oh
you know.
God, yeah. And it was nice in the summer because then everybody seemed to get their holidays and the students got to work.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was
Right.
quite nice.
Yeah, that's good.
That was like
Yeah.
and the pay was, that was where you could work as a woman and, make a
good money.
difference,
Yeah. Oh
So-
yeah, and benefits.
Oh,
and,
for sure.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So was there expansion at all while you were there, Shirley? You were there?
expansion, well, with the machinery, they always, updated the machinery and things like that. And a lot of things they dropped off, like the hockey shafts, they didn't make anymore because it was so, they would have to leave making the underlayment in order to change the layup over to the hockey shafts, which took quite a while. We did that for a day. We also made glice,
Right.
and that was another thing. That's the material that they skate on or practice skating on. But that also took days, and the fumes from that was wicked.
Right.
But they did try it, but I guess it was too labor intensive and not viable, money wise for them to
Well, when
keep
the
on
men
with
were
that.
here, they told, one of the things they said was that in order to make a big floor of it, you had to have those pieces exactly
Yeah.
fit together
Yeah.
in order to make a good size floor with it. It was interesting because I hadn't thought of that part.
I did see a video on it where they were practicing skating on it, and it looked not too bad.
Yeah.
But a lot of people use that stuff for cutting boards.
Yeah.
No.
Great
Still
cutting
ha- yeah,
boards.
we still have a few pieces at our house, that's
Yeah.
for sure. But and it was interesting because I think a lot of the machinery came from Europe, right?
Yeah, I think so
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
And they renovated some of the stuff, the old machinery that they had here to do it. It was pretty rinky-dink looking,
Yeah.
but it worked, but it was
Yeah.
too much, yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah.
One other thing I wanted to say was they had a recreation committee.
All right.
And
Oh, yes,
I
that's
found that the more things that you got involved with,
Yeah.
the better it went. And we had our dances
Oh,
and
it was nice.
lots of
Yeah.
things for the kids. They sponsored skating at the arena free of charge.
I remember they had contests for the kids too, lots of times.
Yes.
Poster contests
Yeah.
and that
Yes.
for
Quite a
safety, eh?
few.
At
Yeah.
the plywood
Drug
mill.
awareness for the kids,
Right.
doing their coloring and stuff,
Right.
and yeah, it was nice.
Yeah.
It was really nice that they had all those activities because it brought the whole community together.
Yeah.
Everybody was there for everybody.
Oh, for
you
sure.
know?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're going to continue our interview with Shirley and Donna, and maybe just focus a little bit on the disastrous fire that happened at the mill.
Well, I happened to be off that day. I was having my daily walk up on Ball Spot. And my husband was with me, and we could see smoke coming from the plywood mill. And I thought, oh, that's probably just a dryer fire. They'll have it out in no time. Well, it wasn't out. A few hours later, it was raging more. The fire department was there. They were trying to work on it. They couldn't actually get to where the fire was. I believe it was between the roof in a place where they couldn't see. It was horrible. At around 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening, there was a lot of commotion on Front Street. There was the fire engines, of course, and the people going home from there, and people trying to get closer to it to see what was going on. They were removing things out of the mill, like important documents and that. It was horrible to think that that would be the end. My neighbor said to me, it happened to be my nephew, and he said, "Oh, that's never gonna. They're never gonna get that fire out. It's never gonna be built again." And he was right. It was a terrible thing to think that in the future that it wouldn't be built again. But everybody went on from there. A lot of people made good decisions, went back to school, got careers, Me, myself, I was at the point where retirement age, so I just stayed home and enjoyed my retirement. But for a lot of people, it put them in a depression, and it took them a long time to get over it.
Right.
But I've never seen flames like that. People had to be evacuated from their homes on Park Road, and I think a little bit on Radisson Street too. We also ran out of water in our reservoir, which made it difficult. They couldn't get any water to put the fire out. It was February. Where do you get it from? I'm sure they tried down at the marina, but I don't know whether they were. I think it was too slow.
And they had all the fire departments, didn't they?
Yeah,
from the
I
area.
think so. Yeah,
And
Shunya, I think, was there.
Yes, Shuna, and I think the Res and Red Rock.
Mhm.
It was a massive commitment for everybody to try and get it out.
But there's so much they can do. They, can't endanger their lives because most
Right.
of them were volunteer fire departments. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
they.
Okay, Donna.
I remember getting off that morning. It was a regular, every run of the day, nothing unusual. I remember that evening that I worked, I was on Patcher, and I was down by the Lathe Line area, and we had a lot of extra veneer that was piled up alongside, and I was on the Health and Safety Committee. With Jill and I think Joanne Dutil. I can't remember all of them, but I remember saying that we should get rid of all that veneer because it is a fire hazard. And but it never ever did get chipped. I don't know why they were keeping it, but it was sitting there.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember that morning getting off, and it was just a normal day. Your shift was coming in, you said good morning, you said, see you tonight, blah blah blah, and off I went. And about 9 o'clock or 9:30 in the morning, I received a phone call, and I think it was from Joanne Dutil. She said, "You don't need to come into work tonight." And I said, "What are you talking about?" She goes, "Well, there's a fire at the mill." And I said, and I'm half asleep, so I'm like, "Well, put the fire out." I said, like, it's a dryer fire. Like, why are you calling me? And then she's like, "No, Donna, you need to get up and look out your living room window." And when I got up and looked out, I knew it was bad. And I remember getting in my vehicle and driving down that way, and it was just so sad to see our livelihood being burned up in smoke. It was just, it was horrible. We all stood there in disbelief. It was just a horrible experience to see, families that both parents worked there. And
Right.
so it wasn't just one income that was lost, it was two incomes that were lost. And it was a pretty sad day. I still think about it, and it makes me sad because I do miss the mill. I miss our family, and it's, you just lose contact with so many people, and my life is busy, so I don't get to see the crew that I had. I just ran into Gail Zapatelli in the grocery store, and it was like we reunited. It was a big hug, and oh my God, like, it's so nice to see you and stuff, because everybody's lives are so busy now.
Right. But Shirley was right. So many people went on to do different things,
and that was a nice
is-
thing. It was sad for quite some time, and then we kind of pulled up our bootstraps and said, "Hey, we need to move on." And I ended up going back to school. I did the personal support worker, and now I work at the hospital in long-term care, and I enjoy my job. But yeah, I still miss that family, though. It's a little bit different.
And I just remember, like, I just have to think of it, and I remember the flames, as you said, that there was never been flames like that in the sky. And I was just saying to Shirley that we were so fortunate that the wind was blowing to Red Rock.
Yes.
It was blowing the other way, because it would have been a much worse disaster
Oh, for sure.
if the homes had. But it was too bad. The other thing, though, that I remember being the positive side was when Daryl Sittler came.
Yes.
Whew, you couldn't move inside that arena.
That's
Yes, I
That was a
remember
real
that.
morale
Yes.
booster, wasn't
right.
it?
It certainly was.
Yeah.
It certainly was.
I can't remember who arranged for that, whether it was Perales or not that arranged for him to
sure.
come. But
Yeah, I
it
don't
was an
remember.
amazing day and evening at the arena. It was just to kind of boost everybody up again after such a disaster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the whole community then, kind of looked out for everybody that were having difficulties deciding on what they were going to do with their lives now that,
Right.
the mill went down. Because there was some people there that didn't have a grade 12. When they were hired way back,
yes.
Right.
they didn't have a grade 12. So it was very difficult for some of these people to find a job.
Right.
Because society today is, you need your grade 12 and stuff. So it was hard on a lot of people.
Right.
A lot of people.
So the government did offer opportunities for upgrading, which was good. And
Yes.
then they had I can't remember the committee then there was, because both mills went down, so there was some support there
Yes.
for people. But
Yes, there was.
you're right, it was whole families that were affected, not just one or two people
No,
working
yeah,
there.
it affected a lot of people. A lot of people.
It's so nice to see now people doing well.
Yes.
And, even the town is, it's amazing. We don't have an industry here.
No.
Right.
You go down the main street and the cars are parked all over the place. People are working. There's
Yeah.
things to do,
Yeah.
In fact, when you're saying that, there's jobs wanting in our
Yes.
town even.
Yes.
There's
Yes.
jobs wanting here, and we're much like White River. We have places but no workers, and then they come and there's no accommodations. But we do have jobs available for people, and that makes a big difference.
Oh, God.
It
Yeah.
does. It does make a
Yeah.
big difference.
That's for sure.
But the plywood mill, I just know, and I always just say plywood mill because I can never, like you, can never remember all the names that it went through
Oh, yeah.
and all the different.
And
And
all the
I just
different
remember
bosses.
Bill Harris being the starter of the thing, and him
Yes.
and I having a conversation over all the sawdust that was getting on my clothes because I lived on Park Road,
Yeah.
and that was from the burner down there. But,
Oh, yes.
yeah, and I always enjoyed taking my classes there for tours. They were very open to having
Yeah.
people come and tours. I brought my relatives from England there,
Oh,
and
nice.
they gave tours, which was an eye opener for people who'd never been in a plywood mill.
Yeah,
right.
it was,
Yes.
they were very accommodating that. And,
Yes.
some of the workers got to show, people what they knew about the
Right.
mill.
That's
From
right.
going out to the slasher and, going through the mill, but the process.
Yeah.
Yes,
You know?
yeah, it was a real
Yeah.
process.
It was, yeah.
That it
Yes.
was.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you very much for sharing what you knew about working at the plywood mill.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.